Hello friends, and welcome back to Webronaq. Here is a number that should stop you in your tracks. Over 500 million Claude artifacts have been created since Anthropic launched the feature in June 2024. That is, 500 million mini apps, tools, and visualizations built by people who, in many cases, had never written a line of code before. And just this month, on June 18, 2026, Anthropic shipped something brand new on top of that foundation. It is called Claude Code Artifacts, and it turns an entire coding session into a live, shareable web page with version history baked right in. In this video, we are going to go from your very first artifact all the way to a published app on the App Store, using Claude at every single step. Let us start by understanding exactly what an artifact is. Alright, so what exactly is a Claude artifact? Think of it as a tiny app that Claude builds and runs for you, right inside the chat window. When you ask Claude for something substantial, like a habit tracker, a quiz, or a data dashboard, a side panel opens up next to your conversation. That panel has two tabs. The Preview tab shows you the app running live, and the Code tab shows you the HTML or React code underneath. The whole thing runs in a secure, sandboxed environment hosted by Anthropic, so nothing dangerous can leak out. On paid plans, artifacts support persistent storage up to 20 megabytes per artifact, which means your app can actually remember data between sessions. You can also connect it to external tools through a standard called MCP, the Model Context Protocol. And when you are ready to share, you just hit publish and send a link. No server setup, no deployment, nothing. Now let me show you how fast you can build one. The whole process has 3 steps, and the first one is just describing what you want in plain English. Something like, build me a calorie counter that tracks my daily total. That is it. Claude reads your prompt and generates the app automatically. A live preview appears in the side panel in seconds. No template to fill out, no configuration screen. Step 2 is reviewing what Claude made. You flip between the Preview tab to interact with the app and the Code tab to inspect the HTML and React underneath. Step 3 is refining it by chatting. Type something like, make the log meal button larger, or add a reset button at the top. Claude updates the artifact in place, and you can keep iterating this way as many times as you need. Each request builds on the last. Now, as powerful as this is, you are going to hit a ceiling at some point, and understanding that ceiling is what separates a prototype from an App Store submission. So here is the ceiling slide 3 was hinting at. An artifact is sandboxed by design. The whole thing runs in a single HTML file inside a lockdown environment, and that environment blocks all outbound network requests. No fetch calls, no database connections, no talking to a private server. That is not a bug, it is a deliberate security decision by Anthropic. The problem is that App Store apps require exactly the things an artifact cannot have. You need persistent user accounts with real authentication, a private backend that stores data securely, and native device access for things like push notifications, the camera, or location. Your artifact calorie counter, for instance, stores its data locally in one browser session. A real App Store version needs to sync that data to a server and log the user in across devices. That gap is real, but it is very bridgeable, and the bridge has a name. Here is where things get genuinely exciting. Once you have built your artifact, you export that code from the Code tab and treat it as your starting point for a real application. The bridge is the Anthropic API, the same intelligence that built your artifact, now available as a programmable service your backend can call whenever it needs to. The typical pattern in 2026 is to scaffold a Next.js 16 project on Vercel. Next.js gives you a full-stack framework where your React front-end lives alongside server-side routes that handle authentication, talk to a Postgres database, and make secure calls to the Anthropic API. Claude Code writes most of that back-end wiring for you. In fact, industry data from 2026 shows roughly 4% of all public commits on GitHub are now authored by Claude Code, so you are very much in the mainstream doing this. The result is a real web app with real user accounts, and that web app is your launchpad for the stores. Now you have a real web app. The final step is wrapping it so the app stores accept it. The most practical path in 2026 is React Native 0.86, the current stable release. You use its WebView component to host your web app inside a native shell. That shell is what the stores actually see. It gives you a proper binary for iOS and Android, plus access to native device features your web layer alone cannot reach. Before you submit, 2 things are non-negotiable. First, Apple requires a privacy policy linked in App Store Connect and accessible inside the app itself. The policy must explain what data you collect, how it is used, and how users can request deletion. In 2026, Apple also asks you to disclose any AI features in your review notes. Google Play has very similar requirements. Second, you declare any device permissions you request, camera, location, push notifications, and justify each one. Apple typically reviews new apps within 24 to 48 hours. With those boxes checked, you hit submit, and your artifact prototype becomes a published app. Let's pull the whole pipeline together now and see your complete roadmap. Alright, here's the full picture. You start with an artifact. You describe your app idea in plain English. Claude builds a working prototype right in the chat panel, and you refine it visually with zero setup. Once it feels right, you export the code from the Code tab and scaffold a real Next.js backend, where Claude Code wires up authentication, a database, and secure calls to the Anthropic API. Then you wrap that web app in a React Native shell, add the privacy policy and permission declarations the stores require, and submit. 5 stages. And Claude is writing code alongside you in every single one of them. That is the shift worth remembering. Claude is not just the starting point. It is your co-developer, from prototype all the way to the published app. Over 500 million artifacts have already been created, and the tools keep getting more powerful. Your idea is next. Thanks for watching Webronaq, and we will see you in the next one.